our Veritan friends, it's Maynard and Mike here with something that's a special edition because it hit our radar and it's an old friend and it's going to be an interesting topic. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Michael Mische. He's an associate professor of the practice of management and organization at USC at the School of Business there. He has been there for almost 30 years now. And we first got to meet him when he did a study last year about California gasoline prices. We've been very impressed with the thoroughness of his work. And more recently, he hit the alarm bell about what's happening to California in light of the Strait of Hormuz problems. And that's that the state is having difficulty getting crude in, and the state is having difficulty getting refined product in. And the state was already facing potential refinery closures and other issues in their energy complex. So it's a kind of a pronounced pinch point, if you will. And Dr. Mische, we always love visiting with you. We're super excited to talk to you about some of your recent work.
Great to be here, and thank you for having me back. Truly appreciate it.
Well, Mike, I guess let's just jump in. I guess one thing, Dr. Mische, the California backdrop, it's one of the most fascinating energy environmental labs anywhere on the planet. It's got a lot of robust debate. It has a real passionate advocacy around a lot of issues. But the state is having to rethink a lot and already was. And then there's a governor's election coming here. And so it just seems like a lot of things are up for discussion. There was a recent change in, the permitting was improved. So I think the loss of the refiner, some of those discussions have woken people up. But tell us about the state of the discussion right now. And is it on people's radar that this is really quite serious, what's potentially about to happen?
Well, I think it's on some people. Thank you. I think it's on some people's radar, and then on others, it's sort of the ostrich effect, where I'm just not going to talk about it. I'm not going to look at it, and I hope it goes away. And then, of course, there's the whole contingency that it's Trump's problem, that Trump created all of this with the Iranian conflict. Point is, in California, our consumption has not abated. We consume about 35 million gallons of gasoline a day. It comes down less than 2% a year. The California mandate to electrify and move everything to EVs has fallen far short of California Energy Commission and California Air Resource Board projections for 2026 at least. And now with the absence of the federal subsidies, we see them falling through the floor even further.
Dr. Mische, maybe just while we're on that, do you have an estimate? This is what I love about having you. We can just fire all kinds of granular questions at you. Do you have an estimate of how much fuel consumption EVs have displaced? Like
Not
how
a
much of
lot.
a dent has been put in it?
No, the biggest dent occurred during COVID, and that was demand destruction when everybody had to stay home. And so when you look at California gasoline consumption, it's up, then it drops, and it's rebounded almost 8% since COVID, up to almost 90% of pre-COVID levels. So a couple of things come into play with that. One is California has less people, number one. Number two, the drivetrains and the miles per gallon of internal combustion engines have improved by 97%. So that's had a significant impact. And then, of course, you have a large percentage of hybrids in the state of California, and then, of course, the EVs. But the displacement effect isn't nearly what the California Air Resources Board had projected, nor what the CEC, California Energy Commission, has projected. Not even close to those numbers.
So maybe, do you mind hitting some of the highlights? We'll attach your recent writings on you called it a disaster in the making.
Correct. Yeah.
We'll send that out as part of this. But do you mind just hitting the high points of, the refined product shortage you see coming, the crude problem you see coming, and then that's all of that is being injected into a system which had a lot of peculiarities to it to begin with. But
Yeah,
please,
yeah, I'd be happy,
please.
yeah, happy to go over that. So just to sort of set the stage, California has the fifth largest reserves in the country, but yet we are entirely dependent, literally entirely dependent on foreign imports. So 61 to 63% of the crude oil that California consumes comes from foreign sources. The largest source was Brazil and also Iraq. Now, that's just the crude oil. Now, you marry that to the fact that California refinery capacity has declined by 22% in the last 5 years. So, an increase in import dependency, a decrease in in-state refinery capacity, not a corresponding decrease in consumption. It's come down minimally. Matter of fact, it's on the rebound from COVID. The largest segment of fuel consumption in California is jet fuel. So all of a sudden now you have this combination of events that we said could happen is happening. And as a result of that, now California is facing the possibility of fuel shortages, certainly very, very tight supplies and increasing gasoline prices at the pump.
So you mentioned maybe the refineries that are there, the California crude. You'll explain this better than me, but the California crude that you do get, that 40-ish% of the domestic production, so to speak, it's a heavier crude.
Yeah,
And so when you're supplementing, when you're going and importing, you're finding that because those refineries were built largely around that heavier crude, or you tell us about how the system works
yeah.
together.
The system was actually the system was beautifully designed. It was really elegant in the sense that California, uh, those of us that know California crude, it's heavy, it's pretty heavy, and it's sour. And that's the oil that occurs naturally in California. There's some variations with offshore, but that's pretty much the oil that occurs here. So the refinery business, and at one time we had 43 refineries. Now we're down to 6. The refineries were built for California crude. So they're still built for California crude. So we take in the heavy oils, the stuff that's, you know, below 12 API type thing. And our refineries like that. Now, there are several refineries, or at least one that can take in some of the lighter crudes, but not all refineries can do that. And as you know, to do so would require capital investment. And in light of the political sort of arena in California, and it is a very toxic environment for a refiner or a producer here, we're not seeing a lot of capital investment being put in place for the refineries, and that makes perfect sense, given the political environment. So we take in the heavy crude, which means we take in crude from Canada, the heavy stuff. We take in heavy crude from Brazil and Ecuador, and a lot of heavy crude was coming in from Iraq. Now, with the loss of those refineries, if I might add, we have to take in gasoline now. So our gasoline imports have hit all-time highs. Never in the history of California has the gasoline imports been this high.
Maybe give us those numbers if you don't mind.
Well,
Like
the
what percent of
gasoline,
the total?
it's over 30%, hitting 40% right now. All right. And here's our problem. California has no inbound pipelines, as a lot of people know. So there are no pipelines coming into the state. So we can't get crude from somewhere else, and we can't get gas from somewhere else. We're entirely dependent on either in-state production and imports. However, for California, it's a little different for gasoline because California has what's called the California Special Blend. It's a special blend of gasoline that's not made anywhere else except in a few refineries throughout the world. And it's not specific to any other state other than California. So it's not really sold in Texas or Louisiana or Pennsylvania or someplace like that. Okay. It's California Special Blend. Now, the problem is our refineries make it, but not every refinery makes it outside of California. So we've been pretty dependent on 3 sources of gasoline this year and in 25: India, South Korea, and believe it or not, the Bahamas. So California's been importing its gas to make up for the loss of the refineries from those three countries. However, in the case of India and in the case of South Korea, the crude oil to make the gasoline predominantly comes from the Middle East, and we know what's happening there. It's been a curtailment of production and in a significant drop in refinery output.
So, do you mind just maybe while we're on that gasoline blend, uh, do you have a view on how useful that blend is, just maybe from an environmental standpoint? Before we're talking about the costs of it, how useful is it to have that standard?
Well, we needed that standard many, many years ago. So that standard goes back to the late 60s and goes back to when Ronald Reagan was governor and Nixon was president. So there was a very valid, bona fide need for that standard, and it has evolved over the years. And there's no question that that standard has had a significant impact on the air quality and emissions in California, and we needed that. However, now there's certainly a school of thought that's emerging that have we reached a point of diminishing returns? In other words, as that standard changes, is there a comparable improvement in air quality as a result of that relative to the price? And so there's a lot of debate going on whether or not, we've reached that point of diminishing returns.
So that standard today, how different would the gas today in California be from the gas sold, 20 years ago? Or how much has that standard moved through time?
It's moved quite a bit, and we've seen every time it moves, there's been an increase in consumer prices. But I think also that it needs to be considered is the improvement in combustion engines and the improvement in how that engine, how efficient those engines are, and the amount of emissions that are coming out of the tailpipe. So I think it's a combination of both. Right now, when you're looking at it and you're starting to think maybe there might be gasoline shortages in the state, then perhaps it might be the time to maybe consider suspending that standard for a short period of time.
That is kind of the punchline of your article. You say we should suspend these standards. We should use the gas that's being used in the rest of the country. Maybe talk about that mechanic, and also, I assume when LCFS was implemented, the gasoline that the rest of the country was using was probably of a certain standard that has also gotten better.
Yes.
And so I assume that Delta, or I guess I'm making a case that or I'm asking you, if LCFS was dropped, you used everyone else's gasoline. It's not like that's, dirty stuff.
Oh, no, it's not like it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. There was a vast difference, right? When that standard came into place, and the gap between sort of the gasoline blend nationally and the gasoline blend in California was very significant. I think today, when you look at the chemistry between those two, it's my understanding that gap has been narrowed considerably, and there's not a significant difference between them. And again, have we reached the point of diminishing returns by imposing those standards, and are we getting any significant benefit relative to the cost off of those? But again, now when you're looking at production in India, which we relied upon, and production in South Korea, which we've relied upon, down, and exports from those countries coming into California down considerably, how are we going to make up for the loss of gasoline? The refineries are down. The governor let Valero die. The governor let the pipeline that connects Northern and Southern California, which we call the San Pablo pipeline, the Crimson pipeline, it's functionally non-operational today. It's collapsed because of lack of in-state oil production. So now we're confronted with this very unique situation of a California special blend that may or may not be produced by the refineries in India or South Korea in favor of a more general blend.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, don't want to get political here and really not talk about governorship, but really, I kind of think about, California, was really, really bad a couple years ago, right? In the last year, we've had some permitting reform on the oil side. It almost feels like they have to be shocked into doing things, right? And it almost feels like where we are now with gasoline prices and stuff of that nature, that maybe the optimistic way of looking at it is just we're to the point now where they're going to have to do something. Do you kind of feel like we've made any progress on that front, or are we sliding backwards, or what's your thought process on the amount of pain that's out there right now? I know with the people there's pain, but with the politicians, are they getting pressured?
Well, they're getting pressure, but I think they're still somewhat insensitive to it. So let's talk about the permits. That was called SB 237. And so that provided for 2,000 permits annually, specifically in Kern County for onshore production. Well, okay, out of the 2,000, I think we've issued close to 300 permits so far, maybe a little bit over that. Where are the rigs? Just because we all know the business. Just because you have a permit doesn't mean you dug a hole, and doesn't mean you're producing, oil out of there. So James Rector and I and Joseph Sylvia, we did a study of 237. We built a bunch of models, and ultimately said, yeah, it'll help. It's a great step in the right direction, but it's way short of what we need. And even with 237, we're going to be dependent on foreign crude and ultimately foreign gasoline. And we tried to bring this out in several studies. Well, now that it's beginning to materialize. But is the state legislature sympathetic? I don't think so, because on March 18th, I gave testimony on a bill. It was called Senate Bill 1035, and it was sponsored by Terry Strickland, senator out of Southern California. And all that bill was very simple. We have the highest state excise tax in the country. We have something called cap and investment, cap and trade, the highest in the country. And we have low carbon fuel standard. Collectively, they add $1.08 to a gallon of gas. The bill was really simple. The bill said, what? Why don't we're not suspending them. We're not revoking them. We're not rolling them back. Can we just give relief 30 days, 90 days, 60 days? Just suspend collecting of those and knock $1.08 off the gallon. Interesting. Not one Democrat on that committee that I testified asked me a question about it. And they voted it down. So I think in many regards, the state wants high gasoline prices. They want, and the governor's on record of saying this, he wanted to use the market power of California for the adoption of EVs. And so I think a lot of this now has been self-created, but also self-engineered. And so has the state woken up? I don't think so. There is a national security issue involved here. I do think, and I do know that President Trump woke up, and he's looking at it quite closely. And as a result of that, issued an executive order or instructions to Secretary Wright to allow for offshore production, Sable Offshore Corp., which is located in federal waters, to produce oil that goes south to the Chevron El Segundo refinery. Now, at full capacity, which is about 50,000 barrels a day coming out of Sable, that's 17% of California's 2025 capacity or production for crude oil. It's a huge number. And if we can bring on stream other facilities, then California will be less reliant on these foreign oil imports and be less supporting of foreign governments like Russia in their nefarious activities.
Yeah, but I've always told people it really doesn't matter what oil production is. It really matters what your refining capacity is, because oil is worthless unless it makes products. And so, from that standpoint, it feels like if California, for some reason, loses another refinery, whether that just be closure or just something happens explosion wise, whatever the case may be, we're talking about a real crisis here, because now when you're down to 6 refiners, one going out is a big, big chunk that you cannot replicate very easily, especially now in the Gulf War. We're seeing many countries looking to basically, are hoarding barrels of, gasoline and jet fuel and stuff of that nature. So maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean that's a very, very important point. So as you know, or you probably know, that late February, early March, the three major refineries that are surviving in California, PBF, Marathon, and Chevron, all issued letters to the governor and to legislators in both California Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission saying, look, there are problems with this cap and trade program. There are problems with the way we have to buy the credits. And you're not holding foreign sources to the same standard and same responsibility that you're holding us to. And that causes, it's an unequal treatment for the same commodity. And it's costing us a lot of money. And it also adds significantly to the price of the consumer. The new proposed regulations, amended regulations, and it wasn't my number, it was University of California Davis's number, had the price of those regulations adding $1.21 to the price of consumer gasoline in the state. It's a huge number. So those refiners got together and have served warning to the governor that the environment is very toxic and difficult to operate in. And I think, the state had an opportunity to sort of salvage the Valero relationship. They failed. Valero, as all the financial analysts know and all the oil people know in the industry, wrote off all of their assets in California, over $1 billion. So their single operating refinery, which is down here in Wilmington, Southern California, for those that need to know the area, it's sitting there with zero value on their balance sheet. And of course, they're operating it, but it's my understanding they're due for a turnaround next year. So the question then becomes, are you going to make the investment in the turnaround?
I was wondering, Dr. Mische, the other problem that California's been having, it doesn't have days of inventory, and it doesn't have the dynamics we're talking about with oil and refined product, but it has an electricity cost problem. And so when you merge these two things together, it's quite a lot of energy and power pain. Do you notice any good thinking holistically on, the complex, or is it kind of bifurcated? We've got gasoline over here, we've got power plants over here. Like, is there if California was a country, we could use an energy minister right now who has some vision for the whole thing.
Yeah, California has the highest utility costs, electrical utility costs in the continental United States. Hawaii, of course, is higher, but Hawaii is really an island. California is high, and 40% of California's energy is still coming from fossil fuels. So despite what the rhetoric might be coming out of Sacramento, we're still 40%, 43% dependent on fossil fuels. I don't think there's been a holistic view presented, and I don't think there's been any sort of strategy looking holistically at energy costs in the state, energy use of the state, and I think that's a huge defect in sort of the state's planning and governance.
When you think about the affordability issues that California is facing, how much do you think energy and power are of those ultimately? Like, how much of the problem is this? There's housing, and there's other things, regulations and things. But when you think about this, the energy power contribution to affordability, how much of the problem do you think it is?
I think it's about a third of the problem, certainly a third of the inflation. And think about this. California is the number one producer of agriculture in the country. Why don't we have the lowest prices at the grocery store in the country for agriculture? We have like the fourth or fifth highest prices. I mean, it's ridiculous. Well, because we know that the costs associated with diesel fuels that go into agricultural production and go into transportation to the store have contributed to increases in the price at the cash register for the consumer.
Do you notice? Do you mind just some of the big constituencies in California, like Napa Valley, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, the sort of LA tech, industrial base, the farmers. Like, what do you notice these various groups saying about affordability and in particular energy and power? Is anybody, having an effect or able to influence this more than anyone else?
Well, I know the farmers are very concerned about it because it's operating cost plus the cost of fertilizer, right? So they know the cost of their fertilizer is going up considerably, and that's going to be reflected in their cost of production. Plus, diesel fuel is used to run water pumps in California predominantly. So they understand the cost of diesel fuel is going up along with all the other transportation costs. So they're very concerned. But I think in California, you have, what we call in California affectionately the coastal elites. And those are the high affluent folks that are living, in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, in Santa Barbara County, in Malibu, in Brentwood, in Beverly Hills. They're quite affluent individuals, and they tend to be more vocal about the environment and climate change. And then you have the working class Californians, people that have literally 2 or 3 jobs. I have people that come in, tradespeople that come in and do sort of work around my home, right? And I know for a fact they got 3 jobs. They'll tell me they got 3 jobs because they'll tell me what they're doing that evening. And so we have this huge bifurcation occurring in California, honestly, between those that can afford it and those who can't. And I think that's going to lead us to a different political result.
So, do you mind getting back to your article? You were pointing out shortage and not clear when the shortage is gonna, that the state will be able to add to its inventory. Like what is your not worst case scenario, but how bad could this get in the next 2, 4, 6 weeks as you think about California's gas prices in particular?
Yeah, there was a movie called Margin Call. And people probably saw that movie. And there was a young analyst who came in and he said, "Oh my goodness, look at the risk portfolio." And it was like, when's it going to happen? And the answer was, it's already happened. We just haven't felt it yet. And that's what's happening in California. So the events have happened, but there's a lagging effect and we haven't felt it. So our model, which have been James Rector and I and Joseph Sylvia, our grad assistant, indicates we have about 10 days of gasoline supply in California. Now we have
And how much would you typically have?
Well, we typically run 14 to 17 days, 16 days. So it's not that big of a dip, except it's the crude oil coming in that's the problem, right? And the fact that we lost refineries and now we're on life support from getting gas from foreign countries. That's the problem. So when you look at the reduction of crude going to the refineries in India and South Korea, and the reduction in their output and the reduction of their exports, and you add the California special blend to it, you got a problem. So we have about 9 to 10 days absolute supply plus a crude supply of about 12 to 14. Given what we know about the refinery conditions in South Korea and India, given what we know about the oil imports and inputs into those refineries, we are thinking that in about three or 4 weeks, California will feel the effects of this beginning to feel the effects of this pretty adversely. And so by Memorial Day, we could have some significant issues.
Well, and you tell us, Mike, jump in here, but I mean, I think of there's a picture in your article. I was recently in California. I saw the same thing. It was like gas was in the 6s and diesel had a 8 handle on it.
Yeah.
So it's already like, that's big.
Yeah.
When you say it could really get bad, like what do you have a sense of how bad it could get?
Oh, I still think we can be I mean, right now in certain markets, it's already over $7 a gallon in certain markets. I think I paid $7.69 the other day for premium, where I live. But it could easily hit $8 or $9 a gallon, given supply shortages, and tension in the supply chain. I think the first thing you'd probably see is the elimination of the 89 octane. Because 3 grades, 87, 89, 91 are sold in California. You'd probably see elimination of the 89. You might see an elimination of the 87 because you can make 91. And of course, it's at a higher price, but all the engines can run on 91. California passed something called AB 30 for ethanol, E15. Not even close, won't make a dent, and not all the engines can run on it. And then the E85 initiative that we have here, not even close, and we all know that that's a flex fuel, and only flex fuel vehicles can run on E85. So I think we're looking at severe stress to the supply chain manifesting between the middle of May and the end of May, and price increases associated with that. And if I might add one more other thing, on July 1st, it's California's fiscal year beginning. Things like the state excise tax will increase automatically, cap and trade will increase, all these other taxes will increase. So adding insult to injury, state regulatory costs will increase also.
I think the governor's race, there's a election June 2nd, which will determine, who the top two candidates are.
Right. It's called a jungle primary.
The
Right.
jungle primary.
Right.
What a format. And then those two will go to the general election. How much is, I assume affordability is a big topic with these governors, these candidates, but how much about energy, power, this immediate crisis? Like how is the election interacting with reconsidering some of these policies?
Well, it's really interesting. On the Democrat side, the leader is Tom Steiger, and he's always talking about taking on big oil.
Tom Steyer. Yeah.
Tom Steyer. So I think he's apparently still in the school that big oil's the problem.
And wasn't there a recent thing about making it easier for the state to sue oil companies? There's been a recent,
oil companies and refiners. Yes. For climate damage under the theory of climate justice.
Okay. So sorry, I interrupted your flow there.
No. And so the operators are facing that. On the Republican side, the two leading candidates, Hilton and Baca, are very interested in this. The one that's reached out to me the most has been Steve Hilton. And he's been extraordinarily interested in what about this, what about that, what if this happens, what does that happen, and what ideas do you have to bring down the price of gasoline in the state of California. So he's been very active in that arena.
Yeah, I said I was going to get political, but I mean, people basically vote with their, pocket, your pocketbooks, checkbooks, right? And it just feels to me like, probably one Republican's going to get in, maybe Steyer's a Democrat that gets in, or maybe it's not. I mean, do we have the potential here in the next 3 or 4 weeks for things to get really bad on this side and Californians say, you know what, we need to change unless the state does something very drastic very quickly? It would just seem that, like I said, I mean, it just seems, it's easy to talk about things, but when it starts really hitting people's pocketbooks, it really is a whole different scenario. How do you see that playing out here potentially?
Well, I think people are going to get hit. I think prices are going to go up. But based on my time in Sacramento, the standard answer is that's Trump's problem. Trump caused the Iranian war. The prices weren't this high before the war. No, they weren't, but they were still the highest in the country. And as I said in my testimony, if I went back to 2025 prices, which I did, and I said, let's layer in all the legislative actions you guys want to take and the cost, you still have the highest prices in the country. So, I think there's going to be a significant attempt on the part of Sacramento politicians, which Sacramento is a single party state here. We have a few Republicans, like the rain in Southern California. We get it, but it's pretty rare. A constant mantra of it's Trump's fault. It's Middle Eastern's fault. It's not our fault. And by the way, we allowed for SB 237 and 2,000 wells. Shouldn't that solve the problem? Well, it won't, but that's going to be the political mantra. I think, based on my experience and sort of feeling I got from being in Sacramento, I'm down to the point where the only person who can really fix this is President Trump through an invocation of the National Defense Production Act and executive orders, like he did with Sable. And so we outlined 7 executive orders for him to consider. And hopefully he will consider those, because I don't think California is capable of fixing it itself.
Will you take us through those 7? What
Sure,
those suggestions
sure.
are?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, here's the most important ones. The first one was the offshore production for Sable, because we knew that would add 50,000 barrels a day to California. And even though the state attorney general says that's inconsequential, it's less than 1% of U.S. oil production. Well, that's a moot argument. It means absolutely nothing, because we don't export oil to the United States from California, right? But it's 17% of California production. It's a big number. So that was our first one. Our second was to allow more onshore production. And so we designated certain areas like Los Angeles County, Monterey County, Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, and of course you have the whole San Joaquin Valley for more production. And that would involve eliminating a lot of the California state restrictions and local restrictions on production, such as AB 1137, which is the setback rule of 3,200 feet of certain designated buildings. And so that was one. Probably the most prolific one is the reanimation of the Valero Benicia refinery. And so we laid out a design for that. And we said, look, what if the federal government entered into a long-term contract, 7, 10, or longer years with Valero, and the federal government, understanding there was a considerable amount of money to be placed in there, went in and we invested with Valero and restarted that refinery. We brought back as many workers as we could, and we brought that refinery back up to production with the following provision: that production would be dedicated first to the United States military use, second to Nevada, because Nevada is about 88% dependent on California for its fuel. So whatever happens here has a dramatic impact on Nevada. So what if we brought that refinery back and we designated its output, and the price will be at market, whatever the contract is, for defense purposes first, Nevada second, California third. That would release some stress on national security and also help out Nevada and eliminate what we call the California contagion effect, right? You know, what's happening here affects these other states. And then I think the third most important one that we had out of the 7 was, as you mentioned earlier, let's build an organization. This is so important to national security and so important to the United States economy. Let's build a special organization that oversees energy in California, that gets rid of this haphazard set of patchwork of laws, this unbelievable concentration on climate change, and this harsh environment against the refiners that's actually driving them out of the state. If they were making so much money, they'd be staying here. They're leaving. Now we need that. And so one of our executive orders, say the top 3, was to set up an organization to do that, and literally take control of oil and gas production and utilities and refinery operations out from under the tortious hand of the state.
Do you think, Michael, if you added up, or has anyone ever added up what California is paying in increased costs for its energy, its oil, its gas, its power? So whatever that price tag is per year, I assume it's a huge price tag when you start thinking, the unit costs and how much volume here, and then the bureaucracy, and before you get into things like industries leaving, just that tab for the state, and then you asked, okay, that's what we're paying for these programs. How much are we doing that much value for the climate? Are we doing that much value for the environment? What is the value? What's the cost benefit? Is someone attacking it from that angle?
Well, I've seen studies like that. Most of them are done by the climate change advocates. But here's the bottom line. California generates less than 1% of global emissions. It's less than 1% of all global emissions in the world. So literally, if we fell into the sea this afternoon, nobody would notice it from a global emissions standpoint. So the question then becomes, how prudent are all these actions, which are aligned with, by the way, the Paris Climate Accords. So you can sort of look at them, you can line them up. How prudent are these actions when you look at it from two perspectives? The absolute economic cost to the consumer and national security. National security is a huge issue here because when you look at the deployment of our fuel for Indo-Pacific action, the whole plan has been predicated on California being able to supply diesel and jet aviation fuel. And with our production down 22% and being dependent on 63% of oil coming in from countries like Iraq, that's not a prudent national security strategy at this point.
Does the sometimes we do these temporary relief from the Jones Act, and then you can bring refined product from U.S. port to another U.S. port.
Right.
Is that did we hear that has been done here, and is there any relief in that? Is that part of your?
Well, the president did suspend the Jones Act for a temporary time, but we only have 58 ships that are qualified under the Jones Act, so it's not that large of a fleet. Most of those vessels are allocated from the Gulf Coast through, Florida and around to the East Coast. So we haven't seen a lot of Jones Act activity here on the West Coast.
But that would, and I'm not, I need to bone up on my Jones Act knowledge, but that would let a foreign flag tanker take gasoline from the Texas Gulf Coast to California, would it not? Is that the way to think about it?
Yeah, it would. If indeed, you could do that. And if we could, that would make sense. In particular, if we adopted the national reformulated standard and suspended for a short period of time the California special blend, because there's really not a lot of incentive for any of the Texas or Louisiana refineries to say, I'm going to make California gas. I mean, I know you're the second largest market, but so what? I got 49 other states here, or certainly, that I can make gasoline for. So, I'm not going to change my production facilities just for you. So I think that would be a prudent policy for either the governor to pursue or the president to pursue in the meantime, in the very short time.
Hey, Michael, maybe, some of those 7 items you talked about, maybe improving things. One of the things you didn't talk about was just, pipelines coming into California. And I saw just, I don't know, in the last 24, 48 hours, the Western Gateway pipeline, the open season, second open season happened. It looks like that's going forward. I think that's a 200,000 barrel day, sort of mid 2029. Obviously, it doesn't help today, but what are the prospects of more of those type projects going forward as sort of to fill in?
We need more of those projects. Okay. I mean, we need at least, certainly back in 2024, after that election, it was early December when I was in DC, we looked at sort of the Southwest, and we mapped out 2 or 3 different pipeline projects, of which one is going to California, one has to go up to Nevada. You got another extension coming down from Utah into Nevada. And these are very, very important infrastructure projects. It would be nice to think that pipeline will move forward, but take a look at all the lawsuits that have been filed against Sable. And so you got to figure there's going to be a lot of court action on that pipeline. And so again, one of the executive orders that we identified as a potential for the president to consider is the pipelines. Make the pipelines a national asset in California. That would hopefully plow the road for rapid development of the Golden Pipeline that's coming out, and also for rehabilitation of other pipelines in the state. And also, hey, keep those pipelines, bring them from Texas, get them to Phoenix, turn left and get more pipelines up to Nevada and cure that state of its tethering to California. So we're hopeful that that executive order will get some traction also.
Yeah, maybe the last question for me is, I mean, when I started thinking about, California, I think a lot of it just the big seven tech companies, right? Data centers, just, all that stuff. And if you look at where those guys were 3, 4, 5 years ago, was really, hey, if we want to do electricity generation, it's going to have to be, you know, carbon free, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those guys have come a long way now where they're like, we just need power and we need affordable power and we don't care what the molecule looks like. And yeah, yeah, exactly. And so when I think about where California is, the optimism is that if they were able to basically start to move themselves this direction to affordability, that at some point those same people can influence the politicians in California to sort of start, loosening up a little bit and moving a little bit more towards affordability and less to the climate. You see that at all, any movement at all on that front?
No, I don't. I do see recognition of sort of that needing to occur, but I don't see a lot of movement on that. I mean, let's think about the big tech and when they sort of came to that epiphany about the power and the cost, it was under this administration, under the current Trump administration, where the Secretary Wright, came forward and said, "We want all your data centers, but you probably should supply your own power. You need to co-generate. You need to generate your own power to support those." And so when you look at the data centers, where a lot of the new ones are being footprinted, they're in areas where they can supply their own power. And it would be very difficult in California for somebody to try to build a data center here to supply its own power. It would have to be completely, I would say, environmentally friendly, carbon neutral type power sources. And then when you look at that cost, it's non-competitive with a data center in Louisiana. There's a big one coming up, as you know, in northeastern Louisiana, and it makes perfect sense because the petroleum industry is there, and it's going to have a lot of power coming from those natural resources. So there is sort of a growing recognition of that, but there's still this sort of sense that not in my backyard.
So just a kind of a dumb question for you, but when you think of the because this does seem to be stuck in the logjam of current day politics, but the politics, Mike was on this earlier, the politics of working people having affordable lives, that is that kind of speaks to everybody. And really, honestly, it was a hallmark of the Democratic Party was usually associated with those things very strongly, that pro-union and all those kinds of things. Is this resonating? Is your message resonating with people who might otherwise have been all in? Like, do you notice? I guess I wasn't surprised that you hear from Hilton, but is there? I guess I'm asking, is there anyone from Sacramento saying, really don't like what this is doing to working people?
It's really interesting. So, apparently I've been on the news a few times, and occasionally I'll actually get recognized. Okay, just the other day in a grocery store, I'm literally, standing in line, and somebody said to me, "Aren't you that professor?" And I went, because you don't know how to answer. And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm Professor Mische from USC. Oh, I thought it was you. You're the oil and gas guy, right? And I'm like, yeah.
that's fine.
Oh, thank you so much for fighting for us. And I went, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, uh, I'm a contractor. I, you know, I'm working 2 jobs, 3 jobs every day, going from site to site to site. I need lower gas prices. These are killing me. And if we don't have gasoline in June or July, which is my really busy season, I'm going to lose my income. And so I do hear from people like that. In Sacramento, it's kind of interesting. Certainly, I'll hear from the Republicans all the time, but it's kind of interesting. I'm on a flight home back from Sacramento, and seriously, sitting next to me is a Democrat senator. And I think he was a member of the legislature. And guy says to me, he says, Professor, I really agree with a lot of things you do. And I understand your data. It's really good. And I said, well, gee, why aren't you sort of voting for some of these ideas? He goes, I can't. Because if I do, I'll get primaried. If I do, I'll get taken off committees. He goes, heck, they'll even take my reserved parking spot away from me. And so when you have that prevailing sentiment, there would be trepidation among those moderate or more legislators who are more inclined to think about hardworking Californians.
We probably, because we're energy people, we're zeroing in on this as a energy power system and thinking about the problems with that mindset. But I mean, isn't there other industries are having some issues in California? Like there's a regulatory apparatus there that is, so we should maybe be thinking about, is the right approach to say California should be more pro-business. One of the industries happens to be oil and gas, one is power. There's a lot of things in there, but the real message is not about climate and energy and power and the environment. It's really just about being less, more regulation light.
So when you look at sort of the rankings or the ratings of states in terms of opportunity or economic climate or friendliness towards business, such as U.S. News and World Report rankings and things like that, where's California reside? Bottom. 45th, 47th, 50th in one poll that I looked at. So it's constantly in the tail end of all 50 states when it comes to things like business friendliness, cost of regulations, highest in the country, bureaucratic red tape, highest in the country, even economic opportunity. I just saw this ranking, and this is the home of Silicon Valley and venture capitalists, right? Ranked 50th, worst in the country. And so you would think that a legislator would take notice of that. You would think that the legislator would take a notice of Californians leaving the state. I mean, we have a net exodus and we've lost a seat in the U.S. Congress as a result of it. And certainly under Gavin Newsom, we've lost over 200 companies. And these are big companies, Chevron, Oracle, Nestle's. These are major companies that have exited the state. And if you sort of think about that should be kind of a good indication of what the world thinks of your policies. And if you want to have a viable economy, then you maybe have to rethink your policies. But to answer your question, so I did want to answer it. So how much does it cost? I can't tell you how much it costs, but I can tell you that on an average day, California sends over $80 million overseas to places like Iraq and Brazil and Guyana to pay for imported oil, over 80 million bucks a day, which it has that oil here sitting in the state. And imagine if California had the wherewithal to produce its own oil and keep that 80 million internally.
Well, it's always seemed like the big miss, and maybe this will change, is that California could have been like the UAE and been a wealthy place that decided, you know what, let's have a diversified approach. Let's build nuclear. Let's produce our oil and gas, but nuclear in particular. A place like California can afford it. It could have led, could have made it happen. Maybe that's naive.
No, I agree. And part of that knowledge actually came from the Vernon symposium that I attended last year, when we looked at small nuclear reactors and the ascent of nuclear energy and things like that. And it made a lot of sense. We have plenty of land in California and we have plenty of need. So you would sort of hope that California would look past solar power and wind power, which is unpredictable and requires battery storage, and would look more towards small nuclear reactors to satisfy its base needs and its peak needs. But we haven't seen a lot of activity in that area yet.
Say it's the most innovative state on the planet, and it's ranked very poorly on being pro-business. So it's what a contrast.
It's a contrast. It's a perversion, actually. It's beyond contrast. And then you've got great, you have great academic institutions in California, as you do in other states. But I mean, California is blessed with Stanford, Berkeley, USC, UCLA, Irvine, University of California, Irvine, University of California, Davis, one of the top agricultural schools in the country. So, the intellectual talents here, certainly the populations here, we're the most populous state. But the question is, can the state get past its climate change agenda and its climate justice agenda to move forward in more practical ways? That's the big challenge for California.
Well, that was well put, Mike. What a tour that was.
Wow. That's a fantastic way to end it right there.
We're sitting here double vests today. We don't compare notes. It just happens. We show up wearing vests. What's wrong with us?
You got to send me one of those.
Oh, that's a deal. That is such a good deal. You've got it.
Send me one of those. I'll be happy.
Then when you're walking the grocery store, someone will say, "Hey, I saw you on Veriton."
And that'll be fantastic if we do that. We'll make that happen.
Well, Michael, thank you for all this good work and for spending time with us. And we did this on short notice just because your paper just came out and it points to some imminent concern. So we thought it was really important to do a special edition.
Well, I truly appreciate it. So thank you so much again for the invitation to be here. Veriton is top notch. We love being on it. It's a great program. And the type of guests you have and the type of information that you provide to the consumer and to the American public and government is just fantastic. So it's truly an honor to be with you today.
Well, you were too kind, but I'll have to add in a fight on. Am I doing that right?
You do a fight on. Yeah.
Fight on. We got some USC execs out there that are friends. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.